Race is the source. It is the spring of all the rivers of culture, society, innovation, religion, all of these things. All these rivers are derived from the spring of race. Now, we're all well and aware that our people and our society, our civilization, is in decline. To look at our people first, you're all aware, you all already know that with the census information that came out for the 2020 census, the first time in the United States history, our race has declined. Not only are we declining in numbers, but we have also greatly, and this is even in some ways even more alarming, we've not only declined in numbers, but even worse, I feel, is that we have declined spiritually, physically, mentally, and morally. Our morality, in some ways, is non-existent nowadays. Now, you see, there's many, and you know what's even possibly most alarming is that there's a not insignificant portion of our race that is celebrating this. These people are dead weight. They're dead to me. And you know, I've said it before, I detest these people. I hate them head and shoulders above anything else. Absolutely. And truthfully. Looking at our society and our civilization, well, pretty easy to see. Honestly, you don't even have to get off your ass to see this. You can just turn on the television, or you can just get online, and you can see the decay right in front of your face, 24/7. Or perhaps you could drive to your nearest urban location, or you can even drive, sadly, you can even drive up a holler here in Appalachia, and you can see the decay in real time. A while back, me and a friend were talking. Ooh, spider web. I love walking through spider webs. That's awesome. Anyway, we were talking, and he was telling me that we need something new. That our people, we need something new. And although he didn't phrase it this way, I think what he meant is something that I've been reading about the last few days. What we need is a new myth. Not to get too far off topic, but I have to admit, before I took this little walk, I've had a terrible headache all day, been stressed, been angry. But it's amazing how much better I feel now. You know, it's something spiritual for our people to get in the woods. It's magical. I feel a lot better than I did just 10 minutes ago, you know. But to go back to what I was talking about a second ago, that we need a new myth. What is a myth, you may ask? You know, of course, we have our pagan myths. And although the myth that I'm talking about is, I think, related to this, it's just a little different. The myth that I'm talking about, and you know, I'm going to, honestly, I might struggle a little bit to frame it as I would like to. See, the myth that I'm talking about, and Hailstorm, I have to thank you, because you worded this very well the other day, I think. A myth is this sort of new idea. It's this new ideal. It is this sort of collective consciousness, this collective consciousness of a people. Here lately, I finished reading Blood Meridian last week, and I started reading Alfred Rosenberg's The Myth of the 20th Century. Now, to the enlightened, you hear the name Rosenberg, you automatically are suspicious. And for good reason. But Alfred Rosenberg, he was a Baltic German, and he had French ancestry. He was not what his name implies. Because, after all, in the Baltic German people, there is occasions where they had surnames such as these, names that ended in Berg. You know, this should, you know, set off alarm bells, but there is occasions where this does happen, where ethnic Germans have a, well, you-know-who-ish surname. Another one that I think of, you know, this is kind of off topic, but a man named Peter Forsberg. Show you a picture of him here. You know, when I was younger, I loved hockey. Very strange, honestly, seeing that I grew up here in the East Tennessee, in the southern United States. Everything down here is football, baseball, basketball, but I always loved hockey. I know growing up, my dad, he bought me and my younger brother and himself some hockey sticks. We bought some rollerblades. We'd skate around at the old elementary school and just play around a little bit, you know. I always wanted to play on a team, but those are non-existent here in southern Appalachia and in the south. But Peter Forsberg, he was a player that I admired greatly. Played for the Colorado Avalanche. He was a great player, along with Patrick Waugh, who I think was probably the greatest goaltender ever. Although I absolutely hated the Avalanche when I was a kid. But Forsberg here, his name could ring some alarm bells, but you know, looking at his picture, you see that the case is easily otherwise. But Alfred Rosenberg, in his book, The Myth of the 20th Century, started reading it. The document is on archive.org. The document is 471 pages long. So far, I'm about 90 pages through. And I have to say so far that I am extremely impressed with his work, with his writing. Now, out of those 90 or so pages that I've read, 40 or 45 of them, well, there was maybe a 5 or 6 page foreword or preface that Rosenberg himself had written. I think it was in 1936 or 37. But the other 40 or 45 pages is a sort of introduction that was written by a professor, I think of philosophy, from the University of West Virginia. I think his name was James Wiskin. Wiskin, I think. Don't hold me to that. I'd have to go back and look. But I have, as I said, this is very interesting to me, because Rosenberg mentions in the book that throughout history, the Nordic race, Aryan race, you know, Aryan authors like Madison Grant would consider Aryan a linguistic term, but, you know, I guess the term is somewhat interchangeable, although myself, I prefer the term Nordic. The Nordic race, throughout its history, has done great things. It has conquered, and it has shaped the environments that they have inhabited and that they have conquered. He said that when the Aryan came to India thousands of years ago, he subjugated the Aboriginal population and had administered a caste system that is still in place today. It was a rigid racial caste system, although now the caste system that is still in place to this day, it more or less goes along professions, social hierarchy. Perhaps there is just a small element of racial aspect left, but as we all know, modern Indians are nothing. They've become, over the centuries, over the millennia, you should say, they've become totally something different, And he says that the reason the Nordic race conquered India and introduced this flourishing civilization is because they had a strong myth. Over time, the myth deteriorated, and I think, honestly, the myth's deterioration is due to civilization itself. I can't help but believe, this cyclical view of history. It can easily be summed up as in the saying that good men breed good times. I'm getting tongue-tied here. It's been a long day. Weak men produce bad times. I'll let you fill in the rest myself. I'm not gonna do it. But I do subscribe to this cyclical view of history. Rosenberg also points out that when the Nordic came to Greece in the distant past, there he also imposed his will and his ideas on the native population, and they created something beautiful, the Greek culture, the Greek civilization. Yet these Dorians, the other types of Nordic sub-races that came down into Greece, certainly left their mark. Over time, due to intermixture with the original, I guess you could say, Mediterranean element of the population, it weakened. But there was always a source, I guess you could say the Illyrians, or these other peoples who came later, that produced the Hellenic culture, the Hellenic civilization. They produced something beautiful. But as I said a second ago, sadly, the product, civilization itself, they have their shelf life. They have innovation. They have their time in the sun, you could say. But civilization is unnatural to our people. We may produce it, and we may produce it well, but sad to say, it leads to stagnation, and it leads to all the things that we see today that are happening on a much more destructive, grandiose, and honestly revolting scale that we see today. Now, you can even apply this to this is a cycle that has went on through the centuries. Let me walk in here and I'll finish the video. A little bit more background information on who Alfred Rosenberg was. During the years that certain regime was in power in Germany, he was the culture minister of the party. He administered setting the trends, it seemed, He set up these beautiful cultural festivals in all the small towns and cities of Germany during those years. Beautiful, outstanding. He also helped get the pagan monument at Sachsenheim. It was built at Verdun. He helped push it through. That was one of his first initiatives. It was dedicated in 1935, I believe. I've also often heard some people, in our circles who are Christian claim, that he was, hooish. As I said earlier, this is false. I think they say this because he detested the Catholic Church, the Roman Church, as he called it. And he didn't think very much better of Protestant Christianity. In the foreword of the book, he has said that he had been accused of trying to revive Wotanism. He said that this was false. He was not necessarily trying to revive it, but he said that it is something that is inherently of our people. Honestly, I have to say, I think after, the artist himself, that perhaps Rosenberg is the most interesting man who was in at that time, I have to say. And the professor, that James Wiskin, he had mentioned that he thinks, in his opinion, that the myth of the 20th century is right up there with, the book, the one that the artist had written years earlier. Another interesting thing about Rosenberg is that I've read that sometimes during their time, that philosophically sometimes he would clash somewhat with Goebbels. Goebbels had a more industrial and centralized vision, it seems, of Germany at that time, while Rosenberg held that it should be decentralized and rural. See, you could compare that to how, Thomas Jefferson, what his vision was for the early United States. Anyway, so going back to these historical examples, you see, and how Rosenberg describes myth is, it's not exclusive to Europeans. I haven't delved too deeply into the book into the book itself yet, but he did say that the Chinese race had a very powerful myth there for hundreds of years. A myth that was actually so powerful that it heavily influenced the Mongols and the Manchus who came into China. But sadly, the myth stagnated. And, this is like I said earlier, it's just this cyclical view of history. Now, say we could fast forward a few hundred years, the same thing that happened in Greece, Hellenic Greece, in Rome, in the early days of the Republic and the Empire, had a more Nordic texture, complexion. Over the decades and centuries, this deteriorated. And so did the Roman Empire, much like the Hellenic civilization that preceded it. Now, say we could fast forward 1,000 years or so. The Spaniards, when they came to the New World, they had a myth. Well, this is probably just one aspect of what you could call their myth, was, the myth of the Fountain of Youth and El Dorado. And while the conquistadors who came here got fabulously rich, did they really leave any legacy behind whatsoever? They may have brought a lot of wealth back to Spain. Most of the conquistadors that came over here, they weren't here necessarily to colonize. And we have the, I guess you could say, the ethnogenesis of, the mestizos. You could apply this, fast forward a few centuries later, You could say that the people of England had this same sort of myth. They had this myth that they attained of, the empire that the sun never sets on. But I will say that the myth of the empire that the sun never sets on also spread this infection, you know what I mean when I say this, to basically all corners of the earth, especially here to the New World, here to America. Now, you could say that the founding of America, I'm aware of the whole Freemasonic trappings that many of the founders of this country were involved in. But to look at the regular people, we had our time in the sun. The Englishmen that came over, the Alpine Germans, the Lowlands, the Ulster Scots, which largely settled here in Appalachia. You could say that in the early part of our country's history here, we had a myth of our own, and that myth was manifest destiny. This book here, Blood Meridian, finished reading it, like I said, last week. If you read the back of the book, to be honest, it is completely misleading. Leftists who are so impressed with this work of Cormac McCarthy's, the rich language he uses, and all of it's an outstanding book, and as probably the most important work of fiction that has been written in the United States in the last 50 years, I would say. Perhaps the 20th century. But if you read the back of the book, and a lot of the people that review it, they'll say that McCarthy deconstructed manifest destiny and the typical Western. And it's so funny, they talk about, I'll just go ahead and read it to you. Let's see. Blood Meridian is an epic novel of the violence and depravity that attended America's westward expansion, brilliantly subverting the conventions of the Western novel and the mythology of the Wild West. This is typical, just Western liberal democracy, university bullshit jargon. Based on historical events that took place on the Texas-Mexico border in the 1850s, it traces the fortunes of the kid, a 14-year-old Tennessean, who stumbles into a nightmarish world where Indians are being murdered and the market for their scalps is thriving. It completely neglects all the other things that led to this situation. The Apaches, who were extremely ruthless, which, to be honest, their homelands being encroached, they didn't want the white man here, so while they are the enemy, they were cruel, ruthless, and savage, but I see where they're coming from. Now the book, it is very graphic, very violent, very visceral. The main character, one of the three main characters, is this sort of supernatural, you could call him demonic entity called Judge Holden. Later on, at some point, I may do a stream where I read some of his monologues out of this book because they're brilliant and they're ruthless to a degree. I may do that later on. But Judge Holden in this book, during one of his monologues, he finishes it, he's just talking about violence itself. He says that war is God. That war is God. And it's a beautifully written monologue, to be honest, and he's honestly correct here. We need a new myth, as I said, and we need to acquire a new myth. He says war is God, and I mean this, if you go through history, if you look at how violent, how bloody history is, he's correct here. It's a harsh truth. It's a very harsh truth. And if you look at our people, European race, Nordic subrace, there's no one, if history has shown us one thing, I've said this before, if history has shown us one thing, that as far as the scale and ferocity of violence goes, there is nobody that does it better. Nobody. Now, there's other races, yeah, I would say that they certainly deserve an honorable mention. The Mongols, perhaps some of the Native American tribes. Think of the Aztec, all the things they did. When it comes down to it, as far as the scale and ferocity though, nobody does it like we do. I mean, you just look at the last century, the 20th century, hell, even beforehand. Look at the U.S. Civil War, and then you had the two great wars in the 20th century, where we completely destroyed each other. We destroyed our racial kin in Europe. But it just goes to illustrate the point that when it comes to violence, nobody does it like us. Now, as Rosenberg was writing his book, he's talking about how we need a new myth. And this is exactly what my friend was saying in our conversation a while back. I think that the myth, as I said, America, we had our myth with manifest destiny. Once we achieved manifest destiny, and once we largely tamed the land, things became civilized. We established connections all across this continent. There was innovation. And there was this residual golden age, is what I guess I would call it, for a few decades afterwards. But of course, as always, civilization is where we stagnate, and it is where we grow soft, and it is where we grow weak. Now, in Germany, they lost the First World War. They had to suffer through all of those things. Here in America, the early settlers had to suffer from, harsh climate, lack of starvation, all the sickness, and not to mention, the native inhabitants. Suffering in a traditional society is not viewed as something that is, completely unneeded, unwarranted, and absolutely negative. In a traditional society, see, this is what in a materialistic society, what we have is that suffering is a horrible negative, that it's horrible and it should be avoided at all costs. And you should take extreme measures to do so. But in a traditional society, suffering, while it was cruel and it was harsh and it was rough, they viewed it as something that was, it was going to prepare you to do something important, to do something perhaps wonderful. Rosenberg and the artist, Goebbels, all those people, the things that they did could not have happened without the disaster and tragedy that the First World War was. It prepared. See, and as I was saying earlier about our people, I hate to jump around so much, but our people, we are currently a lost people. We have lost our sense of beauty, we've lost our sense of tradition, of honor, and of strength. Nowadays in our race, you see so many that the men are effeminate, the women try to be masculine. It's just a complete reversal of the natural order of things. And this is one of the reasons that we are in dire need of a new myth. We need it possibly more than anything, to be honest. Now, Rosenberg and the German people needed a new idea, a new ideal, a new myth. And these men put their ideas out there to a group of starving, impoverished people who needed this. All of these men would not have come around if it wasn't for horrible people like Lenin, like Trotsky, Rosa Luxemburg, Bela Kun, all these people. They would have never gotten to where they were without all these horrible things happening beforehand. And we see that same thing happening today to a degree. Certainly, possibly to a much worse degree. This was their myth. The view of National Socialism. This was their myth. And it helped them to restore sanity, to increase the birth rates, all of those wonderful things. It gave the German people a sense of pride. There for several years, they were the most technologically advanced civilization country on the earth. And they were destroyed, of course, by, usual groups, usual suspects, you could say. Although I've always been, I have a deep admiration for these people and their ideas. I think we can learn from them. But we need a new myth. I'm not saying this to denigrate what they did, to put it down. I'm not putting it down at all. But we need, honestly, I think the symbology, the symbolism, the aesthetic that these people had, I think it was divinely inspired, certainly. That symbol on their flag. It's been around for millennia. It's been seen in various historical cultures across the world, but overall, it is a Nordic thing. Honestly, I've told this story before. When I was a child, I first seen this symbol in a World Book encyclopedia. I was 4 years old, and I was transfixed by this symbol. It left quite the impression on me, so much so that I got up out of my room, walked to the kitchen where Mom was cooking dinner. I was like, Mom, what is this cool symbol? Oh my gosh, this is so cool. To be honest, I thought it was honestly much more beautiful than the American flag, which was hanging up in my room. Mom then explained to me, the typical mainstream view of history. I labored under this delusion there as a child, up through my teenage years, but I always had questions. It's just victims of the propaganda. There's so many. I think all of their ideas were divinely inspired. But we need a new myth. We need to quit looking backwards. We can look back. I have a deep admiration for these people, for history, and for learning from it, but it is not good to live in the past. We can learn things from these people. Out of all the ideologies, I guess you could say political ideologies, their ideology is the one that I would identify the most with because of the racial aspect of it and the actions that they committed during this time and how they completely turned things around in Germany during those years. Now, as far as economic systems, I hear a lot of our guys going on about economic system, this, that. Honestly, economics bores me absolutely to death. I would rather watch paint dry on a wall than read about economics. Truly. I don't care about money. All I care about is history and blood. Anyway, as much as, I identify with these men, I can't claim to be NS, honestly. I can't, because we are separated by 80 years. They were on a different continent. They are our racial kin, close racial kin, but that is a time that has passed. And although I admire what they've done greatly, we need something new. We can take things that we have learned from them, perhaps learn from their failings, but we need something new. It doesn't do to live into the past. So we need a new myth. And how do we acquire this new myth, you may ask? I honestly cannot tell you what the new myth will be. We all have, in these spheres, in these circles, we all have, this common goal. I guess you could say of what my friend says is white sovereignty. We want something natural. We want our lost virtues of strength, honor, and beauty restored. And we want to reclaim our destiny. So, I couldn't tell you what the myth is, what the next great myth will be. But we are due one, and we need one more than ever. Just looking at all the degradation and the deterioration we see going on around us. How do we acquire that new myth? I think we acquire it the same way that these men, Rosenberg, the artist, all those men, they had to suffer. And we are going to have to suffer as well. We don't know how bad, we don't know how long. But you see, I'm also an accelerationist. I'm a racialist, accelerationist, tribalist. You could call me a nationalist, but like I said before, civilization weakens us. We have our little residual golden age, but after that it stagnates, and that's where we're at today. We're at the decay stage, the death and decay stage. This is how you acquire it. This collective conscious. You know, we've suffered some already. Mostly, I would say, secondhand. But it's going to get worse. And you know, although the picture looks bleak, I'm not one of these people that stays depressed. You know, you've got to be optimistic. Because, I mean, if you're going to be depressed all the time, you may as well just roll over and die. And although things are going to get hard, I mean, we see it everywhere. The Fed printing all this money. I hope they keep on printing, and I hope the bottom falls out. Things will get bad. You know, this is not something to look at lightly, but you have to steel yourself and make preparations to persevere. You see all the vaccine mandates, Biden and his medical tyranny. It's the only way to sum it up. You know, this is pushing. I hope they keep pushing, because eventually it's going to break, and it's going to snap us out of our lackadaisical pussiness, for lack of a better word. This is how we will acquire the new myth, the new ideal that will help us to rediscover and reclaim what has been lost. This is what we need. We need the new myth. Thank you all for watching. Bye-bye.